Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth in our webinar series on the survival guide for SharePoint. Today we're going to be talking about automation. My name is Edmund White. I'm a field product manager here at AvePoint. I got some details up there if you want to reach out. I'm happy to take questions and to connect with you all. I have a ton of material here. I'm very excited to get through it today, so let's just jump right in. I mentioned that this is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars in the survival guide. First one that we looked at was the assessment phase of the guide. So this is, I realize there's issues or I don't have visibility. How do I get that? How do I report? How do I diagnose problems? Things like that. Then we moved on to the repair phase. So now that I understand what's going on in my SharePoint environment, I can go in and start fixing it, putting it back together, setting it on a track that makes sense. This is a lot about management. It's a lot about content as well, handling that. Then in the last webinar presented by John Peluso, we looked at enforcement. This is a great next step from repair. So this is where you're going to start to become proactive. So everything up to now is very reactive. It's very much, I inherited this and I need to make changes. Now we can really look at what can we put in place that can get us moving in the right direction before things go wrong. And actually this enforcement part is going to come up a lot today, and I'm going to refer you back to this webinar. So I highly recommend this one. So today we're going to be looking at automation, which is a logical next step from enforcement. We're going to put this in kind of these enforcement topics on rails, make them available to end users as well as relieve burden. So we're going to look at things like how do end users get the resources they need quickly? How do we offer these services in a way that doesn't burden our IT staff? How do we automatically do things like tag and classify for retention purposes or maybe data protection purposes? So let's hop right in. So what are we really talking about with automation here? So specifically, we're looking at controlling repetitive tasks, time-consuming tasks, and complex tasks. These are things that end up taking up some of our smartest people's time doing repetitive things. We hear that in the development world, in the SharePoint development world, 80% of their time is being spent on operations, right? So automation really attacks this from the get-go. So being in product management, we're kind of a hub for information coming in from the field, from our customers, things like that. So I want to share some of that with you. So what's the language that we're hearing from our customers when it comes to automation? So we're hearing very granular requirements. So things like how do we apply and enforce settings and configurations? How do we handle our content, the actual data that's in there, and make sure that it aligns with security, it aligns with the containers that it should be in? We hear a lot of requests around reporting and auditing. And then, of course, privileged access, right? So our permissions models, as well as sharing. So what permission model do we have in place, and how do we adapt that to the business needs for sharing this content? So here are actually actual quotes from these different areas. So this customer decided that they were going to take the business roles out of the site collection administration role in SharePoint. So once they did that, they had a lot of tasks that needed a way to kind of automate them, right? Because they're no longer making those settings available that configuration available. So now they need a way to have those requests go through. And they realized because of the size of their environment that that was going to have to be automated. So they talk here about approval processes, about site directories, provisioning, permissions changes, etc. So this customer is concerned with templates that already go out the door with everything set up exactly how it should be. So during the provisioning stage, how do we make sure that everything is born correctly? Here's a very specific one, right? So this customer is looking at versioning, version history, making sure that that is turned on across the board, as well as remains turned on for the duration of that content's relevancy. Now we look at some of the content compliance requirements that we see coming in. So capturing information classification types for each document, right? So applying metadata that's related to what's inside of that document so that we can then control who has access to it, where it goes, all of that. And having this done in real time. This is the second part here. So we need to put our standardized classification levels directly on those documents and labeling them. So this is all, real-world requirements that we see. We see this every day. We talk to people about these every day. Here's another great one. So they're concerned with all of the sites, including some of the more flexible sites like OneDrive, My Sites. They want to make sure that their restricted content doesn't end up in a non-restricted site. So they have a permissions policy. They understand that permission policy is only as good as the content that's actually in there. So they're thinking ahead and saying, how do we make sure that this content doesn't leak into an insecure area? We also have here sharing of content, right? So once it's stored, even if it's on a My Site and it's only available to that person who owns that My Site, what happens then when they go out and are social with that, or share it with somebody, or add somebody into that, or want to collaborate with somebody on that document? And then, of course, reporting and auditing requirements that we see every day. So logging and reporting all of the activity that's going on, giving access to those logs to the correct people, whether they be SharePoint admins, content owners, compliance officers. We need to get that content into the hands of the people who can actually handle things. But we don't want to overwhelm them. So this is this last point, right? So we want to identify suspicious activity and present that first. We want to prioritize these events that are coming in. So we're getting all of this feedback, from customers that we're talking to. It's all around management and control, right? So there's two parts to this, right? And this is what our goal for SharePoint administration is. It's the management and control part of it, and it's also the user enablement part of it. If you don't have both of them, you end up in situations where you might have the control, but it's unusable. Users will always find the path of least resistance, and that might not be a secure way of handling things. You also, want to encourage adoption of these platforms that you're investing in. So we have to look at user enablement as a major requirement for our automation as well. So what are we really talking about here is governance, right? We have this goal in sight, right, where we have our policies, what people can and should do, and we have our user enablement, which we have to assist people to do these things the correct way. And then we have the enforcement or the validation part of it, where we can actually prove that it is occurring in the way that we hope it is, or the way that it was set up to create. So for the enforcement side of things, again, I refer you back to the last webinar. There's some great information in there around enforcement. Today we're going to really concentrate on the policy side and the guidance side. So governance is coming up here, right? Governance really is just policies and guidance, right? So it's kind of running this middle ground here because we're talking about a lot of things. So we're talking about this Venn diagram. We're right in the middle of this Venn diagram where we have our governance policies, we have our compliance policies. We need to bring them together in a way that controls our environment and enables our users to use it effectively, to be agile in it. So the question comes up, for me, for my environment, what needs to be governed? Not everyone's environments require the same level of governance, and we're going to look at that. So it's obviously customized to the organization, that's doing these activities. But there's a lot. The point here is that there's a lot to be covered. Now, whether all of these apply or don't depends on a few things, and we'll look at that in a minute. But if we just look at provisioning new site collections, we're going to need to look at what their data protection plan is. What's the SLA on them? We need to look at the auditing requirements. Like we were seeing before, customers need that reporting. But how much do they need? How do we need to prioritize that reporting for them? We need to look at end of life for the entire site collection. We're not going to provision things in our environment that have no due date on them, because then we end up in situations of sprawl in our SharePoint environments. Do we need to externalize? Do we need to relieve SQL storage burdens? We need somebody who owns the site collection, someone who we can go out and ask questions to later on down the road. Are there any compliance concerns here, right, based on the type of content that's going to be stored in the site collection? And of course, are there any customizations? Is there any branding? Are there any design elements that need to go into this site collection? And then how do we handle the changes over time, right? So this site might start out as an experiment, turn into production. How do we change the level of SLAs that we're providing here? Who owns it? People move departments. The site might get large, right? How do we then maintain that SQL storage for that? So it's not just at the birth of this site, but we need to have some way of keeping track of all of these different governance items or policies through the entire life cycle of the site. This is a lot. And that's just site collection. So here, let's look at a library. So library provisioning generally left up to the site owner, or maybe an editor of the site. But, does this library require different data protection than maybe another library? Is this Christmas photos or is this financial reports? Do we need auditing for this that's different from the container that it's in? Are there specific content types that we want to use for this type of data? How are we going to communicate that to the end user? If an end user needs a document library, they're going to go in and click, I need a document library, not necessarily the one that has the specific content types. Do we require IRM? Again, it's a sensitive content. Compliance concerns, right? Information management. And again, this is over the life cycle of the site as well. So again, all of these policies, they keep adding up, And it's not just on the provisioning side of things. So let's just look at an example other activity that's going on all the time in SharePoint. There's lots of these, but just on sharing content. Do we have a permissions model for the content already that supports the sharing? What permission levels are allowed to be shared to, and how long is that sharing required? Like provisioning, we're not going to do something in the environment that we don't know when the end of it is for, right? This could be someone who just needs to look at a document today and then never needs to see it again. Do we need approval? And since we're adding permissions constantly, do we ever need to go back and look at these permissions? People have left the company, right? People have moved on to other departments. Maybe something was shared with an inappropriately high level of permissions to it. So we're talking about pretty much every aspect, every functionality within SharePoint has policies on it. Now, whether these policies are in a binder on someone's desk or they live in your SharePoint farm admin's head, they exist because they're driven by a lot of forces. They're driven by your DBAs, by your business stakeholders, by your own internal needs to keep SharePoint up and running. So not only that, we're also going to add another side to this cube where there are different types and different areas and different workloads that SharePoint supports. So we have a portal which might have your department sites in it that are published data for the whole company to see, right? We might have community sites where experts can field questions from field staff, for example. Might have project and team sites, smaller teams, right? More active collaboration. And of course, personal My Sites. So the governance requirements for these different types of sites vary as well. So we've got tons of policies that vary over many different types of sites within the environment, and then you multiply that by how large your environment is. So the question really is, you know, are we just in there fighting fires as SharePoint admins, handling ticket requests as they come in, right? Or are we driving business value and you know, providing new solutions and better ways of doing things and exciting new technologies to the business? Where does that time come from? So again, quotes from our customers, right? Users create havoc through too much privilege in SharePoint. Right? This is a very IT perspective. I'm disconnected from the content, but responsible for making decisions for it. Right? These all resonate. So there are 3 ways that we handle enforcing these governance policies throughout SharePoint. The oldest way is the manual approach, right? So it's the train and trust approach. So maybe there's SharePoint training. Maybe you certify some content owners. And then you let them do their thing. Or you have a massive staff who's going through and making sure that things are running smoothly and fixing and repairing and assessing, like we were talking about in earlier sessions. The approach that AvePoint originally took to this was a semi-automated approach. So this can be done through PowerShell scripts or through third-party tools like DocAv. So it is a value add, and it does take the burden off of your IT staff by semi-automating some of these activities, right? But at scale, right, as you get larger, even if you have the whole DocAv 6 platform, it's still going to be a massive burden to have all of these policies maintained. Even if you choose a few of them, you're probably not hitting everything that would really make your site very valuable to the business. So the last way is the fully automated approach, which we see coming obviously from governance automation, which is our AvePoint product, and then most often outside of governance automation is homegrown custom apps, which are generally beefed up PowerShell scripts. So this thinking is out there, it's in place. People are seeing the need for this and the need to move towards this more automation. So let's talk about a new way of doing this, so the automated approach. So if you remember our goal, right, it's both management and control and also user enablement. So let's look at how SharePoint is delivered inside the organization. Traditionally, when we come into a customer, it's often delivered as a platform. So there's some generic sites that can be provisioned, which usually are don't exactly fit the business needs. So there's a little bit of customization that needs to happen on the back end of that. And the departments and the end user. So it's basically you set up SharePoint, deliver it out, and then departments figure out how to get their value out of it. And then there's the concept of the service, right, which is talking about all the time now with the cloud, where we have very specific pre-configured solutions that can be deployed, often self-service deployment. So an end user knows what they want from a business purpose, but from a business perspective, goes in and asks for it, and it gets delivered to them. And there's a lot more transparency here too. They get access to more reporting, and there's better alignment with the business needs, right? So we can kind of blame this on cloud services, both for enterprise now increasingly, but on the consumer side for years now, people are used to computing in this way. And it's really up to our organizations to kind of get on board with this. When you go and use one of the consumer products out there, one of the SaaS offerings, maybe to do email or your taxes or something like that, how often do you submit a ticket to get help, right? It's a much more as a service, right? Self-service. If you can't figure out how to do it yourself, you're probably not going to. So what we need to do is really bring our organizations into this era where people can figure it out themselves. They can get what they need. They can do it quickly and get back to work, essentially. So let's look at what IT as a service means. So this is straight out of Wiki. I'm not going to read it, but the key parts here: encouraging the consumption of the service. This is massive. We want user adoption. We want to pass on the costs of this service in a way that makes sense for everybody. We want to be closely aligned with what our users need and want. And I think almost most importantly, the last one, business agility. And I'm going to use even ourselves at AvePoint as an example of this later on. Business agility is key. I think it's the foundation to all of these other things, encouraging consumption and partnering closely. So when we take this general IT as a service model and apply it to SharePoint, what do we need to include in our strategy? So we need automation for admin efficiency. We talked about this. The admins are either overburdened or just not doing. Some things are sliding, right? Which from all the admins that I've talked to, it's just not a feeling that they enjoy, right? It's just, I would love to get to that, but I just don't have the time. So we need to increase their efficiency by taking these repetitive tasks off their plate. We also need to provide this self-service for the business. As we saw, this is what our users are used to, and it increases that business agility. And we also need a way to show accountability and ownership of what we're providing, and offer a way to do this change management, lifecycle management over time, because things change, and even things started correctly can quickly go off course. So let's come back to our 3 pillars here, right? So our policies, guidance, and enforcement. And we're going to start talking about what solutions look like to this with products like AvePoint Governance Automation. So policies, what people can do and should do, are very important. They exist, whether they're, like I said before, whether they're written down or they're in someone's head, they absolutely exist. It's better that they're written down, right? It's even more advantageous if they're pre-configured into automation software. One of the things, because we're doing business enablement and control and management, is we need a way to surface our policies to our end users in a way that they understand and that's useful to them. So I'm going to start with kind of the end user perspective of this. So this is a site that's controlled by governance automation, was provisioned by governance automation. You can see that there is a full 2013 app that you can go into for the full governance automation experience. But we also have here this site information card, which is on the front page of this site, and it provides all of this policy information to the end users of this site. It's audienceable, so if you only want the owners to see it, that's fine. But we have a few tabs here. The first tab is going to show you who the owners are, both from a technical and a business perspective if you have questions or need to reach out. We're also going to show you the life cycle and expiration information. So if this site has a lease period, right? We said we needed it for 6 months. You can see how much is left on that. Site metadata is very important. Metadata can include things like the sensitivity level that this site is rated for, essentially, for the content that's in it. It can show you what cost center it belongs to. It can even show you things like what the quota is, what the SLAs are, what extra goodies it was provisioned with. And then this last tab, which we're displaying here, is the first that we're seeing of a services catalog. So this is the self-service part of things. So you can see here we have a lot of different options here. This user is likely has higher permission levels to this site. So we see some provisioning tasks here. We can create a subsite, we can create a library, specific library that has a specific content types and views would be my guess built into it. And many other changes that we can make in here, but it's all self-service. So let's look at the back end of this. What's driving this? This is all great, right? And it's simple, and the user can understand it. But how powerful is it really? So if we look at the out-of-the-box offerings that we have, these are the templates that we can use. So we saw some provisioning templates. For example, create a site, create a list library, and we can make many instances of these to suit the specific purpose. So on that site, you saw that there was create a library for product management. That means that it had very specific policies associated with it. Same goes for security. We can do copy and move content. So anytime that a user needs to copy a document or a library somewhere else, they can do it through a self-service mechanism rather than sending in a ticket. This is what we're trying to avoid here. And then we also have the custom service, which means that this whole thing is very flexible and very extensible from IT's perspective. We can put a lot of additional functionality in here without having to do custom codes or hot fixes. We leave that flexibility open to you. So let's look at an example of one of these service templates being made into something that is clickable by the end user that they can fill out. So let's take, for example, a new project site. So in there, we're going to include site configuration information. We're going to include security information. Who owns it? Are there templates? What kind of navigation does it need? And we get very granular with this. We can pack in all of those policy statements into it. So this is the first, side of this. This is kind of like a cube if you think about it. So the second part of this is what policies drive this site. So we have a site that's kind of configured. It's got your permissions, your template, whatever. What other SLAs are we going to provide here? The site's very busy. You don't have to read all of it. But it's things like backup, right? We were talking about before. It's things like auditing. Is that going to be turned on? And how much of it? And you can see we can have different ratings, for different types of sites. We were looking at this before, right? So, for example, a department site might have a high business impact, and a My site might have a low business impact. And what we can do is make policies for each of them that reflect the SLA that they require. And then the third side of this cube is what type of, who's requesting it, right? Is this a sales type site, right? What kind of policies are going to be in that? Security, who's the contacts, things like that. Is this an HR type site? Are we concerned about sensitive content? Or is this a project site? And what automation allows us to do is to control all of these moving parts in a very simple way, and then even better, to display it to the end user in an ultra simple way. If you think about it, we do need information from the end user, but we don't need all of that policy information from the end user. We know a lot of it. So we need things like, who do you want your secondary site owner to be, right? What's the business purpose for this site? Are you doing RFPs or things like that? So they get a simple form that they can fill out themselves, and then we can drive this. So what's even better here is that we can pack in a lot of complexity into here. So we come up with the idea of a business application. So we've gone beyond just provisioning site collections. These site collections have very specific things that they need to do. They need to manage projects. They need to track KPIs, right? We need to share information internally and externally. So in SharePoint lingo, that means we require sub-sites. We require specific types of libraries. We might require 2013 apps that are customized, specific permissions. So how do we actually get this out into SharePoint fully made without having to go in afterwards and make all these changes, right? That's what you get with PowerShell. So you get a site collection made, and then you have to go in and add your permissions or add your sub-sites, add your content types to it. So we need to be able to, gather the requirements, set it up correctly. We also need a way of, if this business application changes, we want to be able to change it for all of the sites that that have this business application pattern on it. And then, end of life, of course. We always want an end of life course. So with initial deployment, what we can do is package all of these complexities that are in the site, the subsites. Maybe it's template documents, maybe it's 2013 apps, things that you can't make into a site template. And we can actually include that in this automated provisioning that we've been talking about. So you request a site from that simple form I just showed you, and you get this business application. From there, if we make changes to this business application, it's actually versioned. So we can go out and say, show me all the sites that have version 2 of this business application. I want to upgrade them to version 3, and we can do that as well. Very powerful. So what does this look like? Basically, here's the slides that I was just showing you, right? We can deploy that pattern, and then through pattern subscription, we can update those sites. So we see down here what version our sites are on, and we can make the decisions to update them through our pattern subscription service. It's very powerful. So here's a quote from a customer of ours who just went into production this past spring. We checked in with them a few months later, and they said that they provisioned 2,000 of these complex business applications in production with zero IT involvement. This is massive ROI for both the administrative side and the business side as far as their agility to be able to create 2,000 sites for their own business. So that's kind of the policy side of things. I wanted to get into the guidance part as well. So, we're already involving our end users more than we used to, with these decisions that are being made so that we can be as tailored to their needs as possible. So we look at it this way. We've got business users on one side, IT on the other side. A business user might not necessarily know which template to use if they want a new library, right? They might not know whether they should make a sub-site in their existing site or if they need to ask for a new site collection. On the IT side, might not necessarily know how to keep control of all of these, right? How to make a chargeback model. If you get a request, you have to go back and interview the requester to see exactly what they needed. So what we're doing with governance automation is business users are making these requests. The IT admins, all they're doing, they're not actively working on the requests that are coming in, but they've provided this framework, this catalog that has all of the policies built into it that's available for the self-service. So let's look at guidance in 3 different areas. And this kind of follows the life cycle that we've been talking about, right? Never do anything unless you know how it's going to end. So we've been looking at provisioning mostly. And we're going to start there. How do we provide guidance and provisioning? Then we're going to look at how to make changes, what change management looks like, and then what the end of life looks like from a guidance perspective. So when a user comes in to SharePoint, they know what they're trying to do as far as their work is concerned, but they don't know what that translates to in SharePoint speak. So what we've done is we've created this questionnaire or interview process that they can go to that kind of directs them to the correct service. We saw that we could set up services in different ways with different policies for different people, and now we're getting the information from the business user that we need in order to give them the correct site back in this example. So here's a real-world example. This is the back end of it. This is what the administrator sets up. And this is highly complex. This is for a public sector customer of ours. But you can see from easily answered business questions, we end up driving them all the way down to the correct request. So sensitive decision workspace site, right? Versus just a regular team site. And that goes through, kind of this branch of logic that ends up, with them actually making the correct request here. So that's what the admin sees. Again, the business user sees something very clean, right? So what's your purpose? What are you trying to do? And then, based on some information I'm giving you, what kind of site do you think you want? So this is an example, right? Here's actually a real-world example. This is what we're using internally here at AvePoint to create some of our sites. So, will this site contain personal employee data? From an IT admin, from my perspective, I'm concerned about sensitive data ending up in these sites because I haven't set up the security to support them, right? So if they go yes on this, I'm going to send them to go talk to HR rather than talking to me about building them a new site. And then what's the intended use? So internally, we've had a struggle with intended use versus actual use. So this is me trying to understand, is this a collaboration space for a small team? Is this something that you want to be viewed by everyone in the company? Or is this just something that you're working on individually? Because that's going to depend, whether it's a my site, whether it's a department site, where I'm going to direct you on this. So actually, I wrote this article. If you want to learn more about how we're using our own software, there's an article on the community blog that you should check out. You have to register for it, but it's worth it. So that's the provisioning side. We're guiding them to the correct provisioning, and we know that provisioning holds all of our policy in it. So let's look at it from a management perspective. How are we going to adjust course? This is where all the enforcement comes in. So again, I refer you back to the last webinar for more information on that. But let's take a look at some of the ways that a site collection could change over time. So there's three main areas. So access management. So who can do stuff there? Do people still need access to this? The data ownership. So who actually owns this data? Are they still around? And the classification of that data, right? Is this still sensitive or is it still not sensitive? So let's look first at the permission recertification. So here is here's a little example here. So we have our IT admin over here. We have a SharePoint site and our permissions. So what we're going to do on a regular basis is go around and check and make sure that all of these people still need access to this. And then if they don't, we'll remove them. This happens in many organizations on a regular basis. And what this looks like to these organizations is a highly manual and time-consuming process, both for the business side and for the IT side. Lots of back and forth, lots of Excel sheets and follow-ups and emails and all this kind of thing. So what we can do is actually automate this whole process. We can set this up to run quarterly, for example. And what it will do is it will actually deliver to the site owner or the content owner or whoever you want it to a list of everyone who has access to that site, the ability to make changes to who has access, and then the ability to submit both the report for making changes and your confirmation that, yes, this is correct. This is who needs access to this site. Again, when this site is provisioned, this is already in place. So this was built-in policy, and in order to run it, IT it just happens automatically. It's on a timer job. So IT never sees this again, and it just keeps running. So we've removed a ton from this. So you can see in this kind of screenshot here, I have a bunch of site admins down here. You know, some of them are maybe not longer be at the company, things like that. I can check them, checkbox them, and remove them directly from this report before I submit it. So I have an audit trail of me saying that this is okay, and the ability to change it. So let's look at ownership as well. So who's responsible for this? Who's actually the owner? One of the basic governance principles is all data should have an owner, right? How do we know who to reach out to for permission recertification if we don't know who can answer the question, right? The problem is that this takes a lot of effort to maintain because people change all the time. They come, they leave, they change roles. They might even change focuses within their same role. So, and they might be involved in a lot of different projects. So how we do this, again, is fully automated. What we start is what's called an election process. It works similarly to the permission recertification in that it's once we kick it off or once it is kicked off by a timer job, it'll go out and ask people if they own the content. So it's a claim request. So we start with the current owner and say, do you still own these sites? If not, do you know someone who can? Either we get a response from them or we don't, and then we move on down the list of people who might be able to claim this site. So again, fully automated, gets the input that we need to be accurate to the business and the business needs without it putting any additional burden on IT. If you go through the whole list of people and no one claims the site, it's probably a good indication that it's time to archive it. And then data classification is super important. So all of the sites that are managed by governance automation get metadata tags that are dropped in the property bag. These are very, very useful. We can use them in filters. We can target reporting. We can target other types of jobs like backup, like archiving, all of this kind of thing. But again, keeping this data current is really important. So we run the same kind of recertification on certain metadata tags. For example, is this site still classified? Is this site still relevant to this region, for example? Anything that we're storing in metadata. That's on the site side. On the content side, we're mentioning this before. We can have a perfect permissions policy, which you'll learn about in the enforcement webinar. But if the content is not right, then the permissions policy is kind of irrelevant. You have to have both of them. So this is a matter of validating assumptions. So we said that this site could not have restricted content in it. Do we know if that's the case or not? How do we do that? So we go through we go through an assessment which validates the content, and then on an ongoing basis, depending on what the site is, we can keep track of new content that comes in real time and take action on that. So for example, if you don't want any restricted content in My Sites, you're going to want to run these scans on your My Sites, and when you find restricted content, you're going to want to protect it, put some kind of bubble around it until someone can verify that it's appropriate or inappropriate for that site. So what we can do, I'm going to show you what this actually looks like, is this is our scanning, our compliance module. And what's happened is this document has shown up in an environment that it shouldn't be in. my account here is the owner of this environment. So they got assigned to this, but it could be a compliance officer if you want. And so they get this as an incident, right? So this shows up for them. And what they get is a complete history and understanding of what this document is, where it's come from, what's touched it, and then also actions to take on it. So whether this is okay, whether it is it's already resolved based on what we did to it, or whether they don't know and they need to pass it on. So we get information like what actions were already taken. Well, we tagged it, and based on the tag, because it was sensitive, we encrypted it. You also get here all the audit history. So did anyone view this or download this while it was available in this container? And we also get the permission levels, right? So who had access to see it at the time? So this is kind of a single frame that I could deliver to the business owner who understands, both what the content is, what the container is, and what is relevant, and then they can make a decision on them. So let's finally look at expire. So what happens at the end of life here? So again, this is kind of a cube as well, right? So we need to understand what we're targeting first. Are we targeting documents and items? Are we targeting sites and lists? Or are we targeting the entire site collections? These are all going to have different schedules, different policies, different governance around them. So we're going to want to capture all of that. Another side is, how are we identifying the end of life on this? Is it based on classification? Is it based on the age? Is it based on its staleness? And we're going to handle these differently for all three of those. And then, of course, what do we want to do with them, right? Do we want to export them to another system? For example, a records management system, excuse me. Do we want to archive them for a certain amount of time and delete them, or do we want to archive them and retain them in a way that's discoverable, maybe to a legal department or to our compliance department? So all three sides of those cubes come into play. And again, from an IT side, this is stuff that we understand and we can set up. From the business side, how are we going to give guidance on making decisions on this? So we do it in the same way. What we do is we deliver an archive approval task, and it allows the end user to view what we found. So we're saying, this content looks stale to us. Please let us know if any of this isn't actually important to you and not stale, and we won't touch it until it changes again. So again, we're providing guidance, we're providing value, and it's all automated, so it's actually no extra burden on us. So let's wrap this up. We have a few minutes left, and then we'll talk about what kind of comes next in this series. So we're going to go back to, the goal of our administration here is both the management and the control side of things, and also the user enablement. In order to have effective governance, we need to have both sides of those equally, or else there's going to be an imbalance that's going to lead to additional issues in the environment or outside the environment. Our three pillars here, and especially with respect to the AvePoint governance automation, but in general, if you're going to look at this, we need to address the policies, what users can do or should do in the environment, and then we need to provide that guidance. We need to enable the business users to do it correctly the first time. And if we do this well, if we do this through an automated approach, it will actually add to their business agility rather than adding any sort of burden on them. We don't want to make it harder for them to do. And if we do this correctly, it'll actually make it easier. And then enforcement, again, I didn't dwell on it much in this presentation because we have that supplementary presentation on it. But we need to be able to validate that this is happening, and we need to make corrections if we see that these policies have become out of compliance with our governance policies. So when we look specifically at governance automation, we have, I'm so sorry, I think my battery ran out. When we look specifically at governance automation, we're addressing the business users' requirements by having that self-services catalog. We're having our IT staff with the reporting and the automation that they need to relieve their burden. And the business users also get all the visibility that they need into there. So that's kind of a wrap-up of what we talked about today. This recording, this webinar is recorded, so you'll be receiving that if you want to go back and review it. We have an upcoming webinar, the fifth and final in our series, which is on September 30th at 2, with Dux. Raymond Tsai, who is a Microsoft MVP. You might have seen him speak before. He's fantastic. He's very charismatic. He'll be talking about SharePoint adoption, which is a fascinating topic that he addresses very well. So I highly recommend that you register and join for that. And again, on our website, avepoint.com/SharePoint, you'll find all of the information about this webinar series and the larger SharePoint Survival Guide series is all available there, all the written content and the recordings. So we only have a few minutes left, and I apologize for the technical difficulty there at the end. So I will sign off for now. Please feel free to reach out. And thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next time.